Hello! In the last episode I described some of the conditions that recently forced me to perform a series of repairs, fixes and builds in the workshop and around the house. This is actually part 2 to that last video, in which I repaired my dishwasher, fixed my lawnmower and built a small portable workbench. I highly recommend to watch part 1 before this one, and a link to that video can be found in the video description. So, as I said in part 1, my car needed to pass a general inspection, including safety and smog tests, and for that purpose I had just taken the car to a local garage and had it checked by the very guy that will decide whether this car is going to be allowed on the streets for another 2 years or not. Among other things, he tested the brakes, exhaust values, and checked for rusty spots on critical parts of the car. And I made a list of everything that needed to be done. First of all, the handbrake cable has to be replaced. It is broken, and the embarrassing part is that this cable actually ruptured during the test. Also, the exhaust values were slightly off, and the guy told me to make an oil change to fix that problem. The suspicion here was that some motor oil is leaking into the engine and is burned there. Hence, the dirtier the motor oil, the worse the exhaust values. I already had bought new motor oil, but an oil change also includes to replace the oil filter, and since a whole filter set for the car isn't much more expensive than just the oil filter, I decided to also change the air filter and cabin air filter. The next thing was that there was some oil on the outside of the engine, and the obvious reason for that was that the valve cover gasket was leaky. And that's the next thing I will replace. The inspection also revealed that there was considerable corrosion damage near the left front wheel. The underbody coating had to be locally removed, then steel sheets had to be welded on top, and new underbody coating would have to be applied. Okay, so let's get right into it. The work on the car was done in a hurry, because I had only a few days left. I had been stopped by the police recently, and they made sure to remind the authorities that my car's roadworthiness had to be checked. All the repairs took me many hours, and I faced many detailed problems. But I will make it short here, since I have still a lot of other stuff to show you in this video. So first of all, I replaced the handbrake cable, because it really is a nuisance to work under a car that doesn't really sit firm in one place. I always shift it into first gear or reverse, which also prohibits the car from rolling away, but the tolerance is much higher than with the handbrake, and the car can slip a few centimeters back and forth. Not a great thing when the car is just supported by a car jack or improvised car stands. Replacing the handbrake cable wasn't all that easy, because I actually had to remove the brake drums on both rear wheels, take out the remains of the old cable, install the new brake cable under the car, hook the cables into the drum brakes, and adjust the tension of the cable until everything was right again. Replacing the air filter was maybe the simplest fix that day. The housing and tubing of the air filter is simply held in place by a few rubber pieces. Replacing the cabin air filter was already more of a hassle, since I needed to remove the windshield wipers and a large plastic cover. Once that was done, I took out the old filter and inserted a new one. And after having reinstalled the plastic cover and windshield wipers, I went under the car and unscrewed the drain plug. And after it had all dripped out, I took out the old oil filter that was sitting super tight. And after that, I screwed the new one in. So the filters had been taken care of as well. Next, I unscrewed the valve cover and removed the old valve cover gasket. It took me a long time to remove the remains of that old gasket though. Then I installed the new gasket and reattached the valve cover. With that being done, I filled new motor oil into the engine. Then I finally removed the underbody coating near the left front wheel, revealing that a welding job had been done here before, and this really looked pretty ugly. There also was another spot that had to be welded. Here it was very hard to even remove the rust, because it was so hard to access this spot. The welding jobs were very complicated and they took me many hours to complete. I was sorta running out of time also. With new metal sheets being welded in place, I applied new underbody coating and used lots of that stuff. Doesn't look too great, but I'd say at least this spot of the car is now stronger than ever before. I don't really have any footage of the welding job itself. At this point I had basically lost my nerve and couldn't be bothered anymore to cramp myself, the welding equipment and the tripod under the car. Sorry, but it just had to get done. So with all those jobs done, the car passed all the tests and it will be allowed on our streets until September 2017. And let's all hope that by then I won't be driving this goddamn beater anymore. So, okay, the problems with the car were fixed, or at least for the time being. But the next problems, of course, were just around the corner. But before I proceed with some of the more serious stuff, let me show something else just for fun. This is an old transistor radio. In Germany it was called a Kofferradio. Directly translated, that means suitcase radio. They were called by that name because they had a handle like a suitcase and they could be carried around like one. The handle on this one is missing though. This model, like many others, was intended to be battery powered and thus mobile. There is no brand name on the enclosure, but we can see some glue residue on here that once would have been holding a logo in place. It's always bad if you can't identify the brand and type number of a device, since it makes it harder to find a circuit diagram. But I will show you how I tackled that problem in this video. After cleaning the surface with a toothbrush and some soapy water and drying it with a towel, let's open it up and take a look inside. What we have here is of course the antenna, leading to the radio receiver's RF or HF part, which stands for radio frequency or high frequency. It is then connected to the IF or intermediate frequency part of the circuit. And here in green you can see the audio amplifier section of the device. These two transformers are not part of a power supply. One of them would be a driver transformer, the other one is the output transformer that connects the loudspeaker to the final stage of the amplifier. The radio does not have a mains transformer at all. It can only be powered by DC. The fact alone that we find an amplifier with those transformers makes it likely that this is a design from the early to mid 1960s. If you want to identify an unknown device, information like that is critical. Furthermore, we can see a battery compartment and an adjustable capacitor that can be used to tune the receiver to a certain frequency. But before we can test if the radio is working, this wire has first to be resoldered to where it belongs. I also temporarily removed the leads from the battery holder so that we can connect the circuit to a lab power supply. Okay, so as you can see, the radio still seems to work okay, but I still like to find out more about the circuit and the origins of this radio. So I started to look for some more clues inside the radio. A good place to look is for brand names on the components. This black component here reads TFK AF105. TFK stands for the manufacturer Telefunken, a West German electronics manufacturer of the day. The first letter A tells us that this is not a silicon but a germanium transistor. And the second letter F indicates that it is a transistor for high-frequency applications. If it were a silicon transistor, it would have a B as the first letter. The second letter, C, stands for low power and D for high power applications at low frequencies. In Japan and in the US, other systems were used to mark semiconductors though. This electrolytic capacitor was made by Valvo and this one by Fraco. Again, two West German companies. This all confirms that this device was most probably made in West Germany in the 1960s. A little odd though is that this diode here was made by Toshiba. I have dealt with many old German audio devices, but I haven't seen a Japanese diode like that in a German product from that time period before. Also a little odd is the fact that the scale of the radio reads kc and mc for kilocycles and megacycles instead of kilohertz and megahertz. I know that this was a common thing in the English-speaking world at that time, but I'm quite sure that the Germans used hertz as the unit of frequency at least since the 1930s. And as far as I know, cycle was never really a thing in Germany. This is a bit odd. Okay, so with this information we can try to make an online search and go on with this little detective story. So the next thing that I did was to simply list all the German and European manufacturers of transistor radios that I could think of that also played a considerable role on the marketplace at that time. There were of course Telefunken, Grundig, Löwe Opta and Nordmende. But there were also Saba, Blaupunkt, Braun, Grätz, Metz and Schaub-Lorenz. And there were also other manufacturers on the European level that made similar products, like Philips from the Netherlands, RFT, which was a name for devices of East German production, and for example Tesla, which was a conglomerate from what was back then the country called Czechoslovakia. And I'm sure that I have forgotten many other possible manufacturers. But with this list I started to simply make some Google image searches and compare what I found to the device on my bench. And I went through many pictures to look for something that resembled my radio. And the manufacturer Nordmende actually made a whole range of radios that somewhat resemble my device. The materials that the enclosures are made of are very similar. Also the scale of the radio has a design that resembles the unknown radio. But at closer inspection we can see that Nordmende obviously used to print the frequencies in hertz and not in cycles on their device. And so I went on through all the manufacturers I had written down. But I could not find a radio that was identical with mine. And I almost had given up when the thought occurred to me that this is maybe some kind of no-name product that had simply copied the looks of the Nordmende radios. And I was thinking about certain retailers that were selling electronic devices in Germany at that time. The most popular was Quelle, with their brand name Universum and also Simonetta. Another retailer was called Neckermann. So I did the same with those names as with the actual manufacturers. And tada, do you see this? Now that looks familiar. The resemblance with our circuit is undeniable. These two devices were definitely made by the same company. The website that the Google search was directing me to tells us that both Quelle and Neckermann sold radios made by the Südfunk Corporation back in the 60s. And with that information I was now actually able to find a model that is from an electronic standpoint even closer to what I have here. At least the IF and audio amplifier sections seem to be the same. The PCB has even the same shape. And here we have a circuit diagram for that device. And we can see our driver and output transformer, a bunch of germanium transistors and so on. And we even find the same exact type of diode with Japanese type number. So if there would be a further need for a repair, this document would be a great help for us. By the way, if you are often looking for circuit diagrams of audio devices and old stuff in general, I recommend you to become a member of radiomuseum.org, where you can find tons of material on this kind of stuff. Okay guys, so I'm sorry to tell you the same thing as in the last video, but I'm really tired from all the editing and I have done nothing else today.
So you will still have to wait a little longer to hear about the other stuff I wanted to show you. But I hope you enjoyed this anyway. See you soon.